Today we're going to start our first lesson in Unit 8. Our lesson 8A is called Rates and Ratios. So as we always do, let's highlight our learning targets up at the top. So I can write and understand ratios written in different ways, and then I can express ratios in simplest form. So before we talk about simplifying things or writing them, let's first talk about just what a ratio is. So in this space right here, where it says ratio, let's go ahead and write out that a ratio is a comparison of two quantities by division. And similar to when we talked about rate of change in our last unit, when you're talking about a rate of change, when you're talking about a ratio, you're just comparing two different things. And rate of change is also this as well. You're comparing it using division. Okay, and there's three ways to show ratios. So these three arrows right here, we're going to write out our three different ways of how you can show ratios. There's three ways to write them. The first way you can write a ratio is just by using a colon. So by that, you would just put like 3:4 and these dots right there, that's called a colon. So one way to write a ratio is saying 3:4, like that. That's one way to write a ratio. Another way you could write a ratio is 3:4 with the word 2 in the middle. So you can use the word 2, you can put a colon in the middle, and then the last way that you can write a ratio, and this is going to be our most common way of writing it, is how we will see a lot of our ratios and our rates that we use. Another common way to write it is to write them as a fraction. So we have three ways to write it. You can use a colon, you can use the word 2 in the middle, and then you can write it as a fraction. Sometimes I'll ask you to write it all three ways. Sometimes I might say just write it as a fraction. So however I ask you to write it, just write it that way. Biggest thing is if you are writing them any of these three ways, you always want to make sure that your answer is all the way simplified. And if it's an improper fraction, go ahead and leave it as an improper fraction. You don't have to turn it into a mixed number. You can just kind of leave it as that improper fraction. So if it's 4/3, you would just leave it as a 4/3. Okay, so let's go ahead and try some examples together. So down here, we're talking about a baseball team. This baseball team has 4 pitchers, they have 10 outfielders, and then they have 12 infielders. I want you to write the ratio in all three forms. Okay, and in this, I give you the first one, I want pitchers to infielders. And please pay attention to the order that they're asking you to write the ratio in. In this case, they want the pitchers to come first and the infielders to come second. So if you look at the number of pitchers, right here, it says that there are 4 pitchers, and then it says that there are 12 infielders. So I have 4, because that's the number of pitchers, colon 12, because that's the number of infielders. And then you always have to simplify them. So when you simplify this, I know that I can divide both of these numbers by 4. So I'm going to divide each of these numbers by 4. When I do that, I end up with 1:3. So my ratio is a 1:3. I would say my ratio when I write it that way. And then I'm also going to write my ratio the other ways. So the next way to write it is with the word 2 in the middle. Okay, so let's say 1:3. And then the last way for us to write it is by writing it as a fraction. So this last way to write it, I would say 1/3. Okay, and all this means is there's 1 pitcher to every 3 infielders. Okay, so there's 1 pitcher for every 3 infielders. And again, order matters. Saying 1 to 3 is very different than saying 3 to 1, than flipping it. So 1 to 3 means that there's 1 pitcher for every 3 infielders on this baseball team. Okay. All right, I'm going to go ahead and have you try the next one. So in your next one, you're talking about infielders and you're talking about outfielders. So go ahead and write it All three ways, when you write it this first way, make sure you use a colon, just like I did in this previous example, use a colon. And then also please make sure you simplify it. You're going to have to simplify this answer. So go ahead and try all three ways. I need infielders to outfielders. Go ahead. All right, as you're comparing infielders and outfielders, if you look at the number of infielders, we have 12. If you look at the number of outfielders, we have 10. So it's 12 and then 10. And then I need us to simplify it. I'm going to cut each of these numbers in half because they're both even. Okay, when I do that, half of 12 is 6. Half of 10 is 5. Okay, so I know I have 6 colon 5. And then I want it all three ways. So my next way is I'm going to say 6 to 5. And then lastly, I'm going to say 6 over 5. Perfect. So go ahead and box in those final answers. If you did not have them correct, go ahead and correct them on your notes. Okay, so we have 6. That means that there are 6 infielders for every 5 outfielders that are on this baseball team. All right, and then lastly, they want the number of outfielders to the entire team, like everybody on the team. Okay, so the entire baseball team, if they want the whole team, that would be the 4 pitchers, the 10 outfielders, and the 12 infielders. When you add that all together, we get 26 total people on the team. So that's our entire team part. Okay, so the outfielders is 10. The entire team, we just added that up. We got 26. Go ahead and finish up this one. So I need it simplified. Go ahead and simplify that to get your first ratio written with a colon in the middle. And let's also go ahead and find how would you write it with the 2 in the middle, and then how would you write it as a fraction. Go ahead. All right, so if we simplify this, we are taking 10, dividing it by 2, we're taking 26. We're dividing it by 2. Half of 10 is 5. Half of 26 is 13. So I have 5 colon 13. For my first way of writing it, my second way of writing it, I say 5 to 13. And then my last way of writing it is just as a fraction. I just say 5 over 13. All right, and then we always box in our final answers. Let's make sure we got final answers all boxed in and ready to go. All right, so here's some ratios. This is us comparing, just comparing 2 quantities, showing it as division. This one, fraction bars always mean division, so we're just showing those quantities written as division. All right, let's take a look at our next example. So for our next one, it says the scale on a map states 1 inch for every 25 miles. Write this ratio in fraction form, including units, and then explain to me what that means. Okay, so the first thing they want is they want it as a fraction with the units included. So if I need this as a fraction and I know I'm going to include units, I'm going to draw a nice big fraction bar here. And then if they write the 1 inch first, let's put that on top. And then if they have the 25 miles second, let's put that on the bottom. So we know it's 1 inch for every 25 miles. Okay, and then the last thing they're asking me to do, so here's one of my answers. I just write it as a fraction, and then check to see if you can simplify. It's 1 over 25, which we cannot simplify, so we just leave it like this. And then last thing it says is, it just says, explain what this means. So in terms of this map, explain what this is saying. So on this map, it states that 1 inch is 25 miles. So what that means is it means for every inch that you count on that map, if you take a ruler, every inch that is on that map is actually 25 miles in real life. So between point A and point B, if on a map, if that's 1 inch, it'd be a little bit closer. If this is 1 inch right here, then that means in real life, to get from point A to point B, it would be 25 miles. Okay, so all this is saying is it's saying every 1 inch, every 1 inch on the map is 25 miles in real life. Okay, and this is helpful if you have whole inches. So if from one city to the next city it's 2 inches, we know that that's actually 50 miles. If it's 3 inches, we know that that's 75 miles. So you can help that to kind of estimate how far away 2 different places are on a map. So every 1 inch on the map is 25 miles in real life. That's exactly what it means for the 1 inch to 25 miles. Every inch on the map is 25 miles in real life. All right, for your next part, I do want to talk about how to simplify these ratios that I give you. One thing I want you guys to notice is if I give you a ratio with a colon in the middle, or if I give you a ratio as a fraction, please write it the same way I give it to you. So if I give you 57 colon 228, then when you write your final answer, use a colon with it. And I'm just going to show you guys how you can simplify these, and it has a calculator next to it because I want you guys to use a calculator to simplify them. We're going to simplify these using our Desmos calculator, and although this problem is not written as a fraction, writing it as a fraction in your Desmos calculator is the easiest way to help us simplify it. So in this case, we've got 57 to 228 that we have to simplify. Okay, so let's open up your Desmos calculator, and we should have this bookmark. Just go ahead and find your bookmark for the Desmos calculator. If you can't find it, go to my home page on Canvas, and it's the second link from the top. So go to your Desmos calculator, and in here, we're doing 57 over 228. So you can push that fraction bar over to the side, the a over b if you want to, or just type in, we're getting 57, and then push divided by, because that puts a fraction bar there for you, and then put your 228. Okay, right now, this is the answer that it gives us, but I don't like that answer because I need it to be a fraction so that I can turn it back into a ratio that has a colon in the middle. So right next to the 0.25, if you see that circle with the 2 boxes in the line there, that's your way of showing that answer as a fraction. So if you just push that button, it turns the 0.25 into a fraction for you. And remember, in your Desmos calculator, you don't have to push equals. It just tells it to you. So as a fraction, that's 1/4. So let's go back to our notes. Okay, and as a simplified ratio, I would put 1:4. So 1 to 4. There's a 1 to 4 ratio. Okay, because it's not very obvious that 57 goes inside of 228 4 times. So it's a little bit tricky. So if you just put it in a fraction in your Desmos calculator and then push that fraction button that puts a decimal, it transforms your decimals into fractions for you. Okay, let's try this one. So same thing here. You can just take this, and it's already written as a fraction, so just take that, type it into your Desmos calculator, and it will give you a simplified fraction. So I have 72 hundredths. So 72 hundredths over, and again, I just push the fraction bar, but you can push that a over b button if you want to. 3.6. Yeah. So 72 hundredths over 3 6/10. Okay, I don't want that for your answer. I need it as a fraction, so push this button right next to it, and then it gives me my fraction is 1/5. So on our notes, this as a simplified ratio is 1/5. All right, and that fraction tool will be very helpful whenever we use, or whenever we have to simplify, because your simplifying can be done for you. Even in these previous problems that we did, like this one, if you weren't sure how to simplify 10 and 26, you can just type 10 divided by 26 and then push this fraction button on the side, and there's your 5 and there's your 13. So that's another way to get that. So if you go to do your simplifying and you're just kind of stuck and you can't figure out, what divides into it or what the simplified fraction would be, that will tell you. The tricky part is if it's an improper fraction, it gives it to you as an improper fraction, so just be careful, or as a mixed number, so just be careful with that. Like if you do 12 over 10, it'll give it to you as a mixed number. So if I do 12 over 10, it gives 2 as an improper fraction. Never mind. So it also does improper fractions for you too. So it doesn't turn it into 1 1/5. It keeps it improper. So please use that to help you. It's a great tool to use to make sure that we're simplifying everything correctly. All right, last thing we're going to talk about in this unit are rates and unit rates. So when we talk about rates, rates are very similar. Well, rates are a type of ratio. So a rate is a ratio. The trick is it has to compare. So it's a ratio that compares two quantities, just like ratios do. The trick is they have to be measured in different units. Okay, so like in the last example we did with the baseball players, this one, it was 1 baseball player to 3 baseball players, or 6 baseball players to 5 baseball players. So instead of that, we need them to be measured in different quantities. That's our biggest thing with rates. You could be comparing money in candy bars, or you're comparing miles in hours, or points per game, points in games. So it just depends on what your quantities are, but they have to be different units, okay? And then lastly, when we're talking about, and I'll just kind of, while we're talking about rates here, look at these examples. You're talking about vocab words and days, or you're talking about miles and hours, okay? When we're talking about unit rates, this is the same as a rate. So you're still comparing two different quantities, but it's a rate in which the second quantity, so the second number, so the second quantity is 1 unit. Okay, and how that might look, usually we are going to write our unit rates as fractions, but you could write it 3 different ways. You still have the 3 ways to write it. It could be x colon 1, x over 1, or x to 1. Either way, if it's a unit rate, this second number here is always going to be a 1, and a lot of times it does not start as a unit rate. We have to turn it into a unit rate, and we'll learn some tricks in just a second on how I can turn something from a rate into a unit rate. And we talked about this a little bit when we did our 7E rate of change notes. One of our examples was $6 over 2 balloons. And then we took that rate of change, we simplified it, right? We divided half of 6 and half of 2. And when we simplified that, we ended up with $3 and 1 balloon. And what I said in our notes, when we took our notes on that day, is I said this right here, this is a unit rate, and this is the first thing we're going to be talking about in our next chapter. So that's why we're talking about unit rates right now. Okay, this right here is a rate, this right here is a unit rate. So it's comparing 2 different quantities, money and balloons. Okay, this one does not have a second number. The second number being the bottom number is not 1, and in this one it is 1. So this one would be your unit rate, and this one would just be your rate. Okay, so a rate in which the second quantity is 1 unit, and there's a couple ways to say it as well. You could say $3 over 1 balloon, or you could also just say $3 per balloon. There's a lot of ways to write unit rates. We're going to keep them as fractions, but just know if you ever see something that looks like this, that's also a unit rate. So a lot of times you can go to the grocery store and it'll say like 72 cents per ounce, or 72 cents, and it'll have a slash ounces. That's what that means. It means it's $3 per balloon, or $3 slash balloon. That's what it's a unit rate. That's telling you how much it cost for 1 balloon. Okay. All right, so let's try some of these ones together. So George memorized 560 vocab words in 28 days. So if I want it as a rate, that just means write it as a fraction. And again, typically we see these as fractions. So sometimes I'll say write it all 3 ways. If I don't say that, then you can just write it as a fraction. Okay, so when we write this as a fraction, we have 560, and it's 560 vocab words over, that's the first thing we're talking about, over 28 days. Okay, so if I want this as a fraction, if I want this as a rate, here's my rate, 560 vocab words or 28 days. Okay, but in my next part, I now want it as a unit rate. Unit rate means this second number has to be 1, or for my fraction, the bottom number has to be 1. So right now, my fraction is 560 over 28. Okay, if I want this bottom number right here, if I want this to be 1, you have to think, what could you divide 28 by in order to get it to be 1? Well, I know that 28 divided by 28 is going to give me 1, so then I have to divide the top by 28. Okay, so again, my whole point of doing that is so this bottom number right here could be 1, and we're talking about 1 day. And then my top number, I have to do this. So just open up your calculator. I need 560 divided by 28. So let's do that. 560 divided by 28 gives us 20. So then my unit rate is this. 20 words over 1 day. Okay, and then the last part of this is just to take that and tell me, what does it mean? So in terms of this situation, what are we talking about? What does that unit rate even mean? Well, what that means is it means that George memorized 20 words or 20 vocab words in 1 day. Okay, or sometimes when we have unit rates, we might say 20 words per day. Or another way you could say a unit rate is, instead of putting per right here, instead of using the word per right here, you might just say 20 words and then use a slash, 20 words slash day. That's the same thing. That's also a way of writing a unit rate. We're typically going to keep it like this, but it's the same thing. 20 words per day can be written like this, or with the word per in the middle, and that's still a unit rate. All right, last one. So Penelope drove 210 miles in 3.5 hours. So again, your first thing is just your rate. You just take your two numbers, write them as fractions. So we have 210 miles, and we have 3.5 hours. Okay, and for our rate, that's all we need. You just write it as a fraction. Okay, from here, I need to turn this into a unit rate. So I'm going to give you a hint on how to get it started. We have 210 over 3.5. So here's my 210. Here is my 3.5. Okay, I need this denominator, I need this second number, I need this bottom number to be 1. In order to get it to be 1, I'm going to divide by whatever that number is. In that last problem, I divided by a 28. In this one, I'm going to divide by 3.5. Okay, which means you also have to divide 210 by 3.5. So let's open up our calculator, and I'm going to help you type this out. I know that 3.5 divided by 3.5 is going to give me 1, because that's why I did it. So it's 1 hour. And then let's do this dividing in our calculator. So 210 divided by 3.5. Let me show you how to do that. So it's 210 divided by, and then I need 3.5. So to type that, I would type the half first, and then click in front of the half and put the 3. Okay, so let me show that one more time. 210, and then push the dividing bar, that division bar. And then if it's a mixed number, I would type the fraction part first. In this case, it's 1/2. So type 1 divided by 2, and then in front of that, put the 3. So there's my 3.5. Okay, and that ends up giving me 60. So it's 60 miles over 1 hour. Okay, again, lots of ways of writing unit rate. Let's get in the habit of keeping them as fractions, just because that'll help us with our proportional relationships that we're going to talk about. But you could also say 60 miles per hour, like that. 60 mph is another way of saying miles per hour. Those are all the same thing. Okay, and then lastly, in words, this is just saying that Penelope drove 60 miles per hour. And you can write it out, but typically when we talk about speed limit, we can just put mph. All right, so feel free to review over these notes, practice any questions, any more questions that you need to. If you have questions on how to type things into your Desmos calculator, especially when it comes to fractions or mixed numbers, if you've got any questions, or if you have questions on like simplifying a fraction in your Desmos calculator, please let me know. Again, please make sure you have all of these notes completed. Use them as you go to complete your 8A homework assignment, and just always reference back to them if you have any questions when we do our bell work or any work that you're doing on rates and ratios. Let me know if you have any questions.